Hi there and welcome to Alpine Bravo. My name's Brendan. This is my channel for all things Microsoft Flight Simulator. This video is going to be the first in a series of tutorials on the Flysimware Learjet 35 Alpha, available in Microsoft Flight Simulator Marketplace and directly from the Flysimware website. This was originally released as an early access aircraft in December 2023, and more recently in, I believe, late May or early June 2024, it was formally released as a completed project. The Learjet 35A was first introduced into production in 1976. Featuring upgraded engines from the original Learjet 35. Carried on production all the way through to 1996, so it was in production for 20 years. Over 700 of them were produced and over 500 still in operation today. It has two TFE 31-2-2B turbofan engines, and it has a range of approximately 2,789 nautical miles when cruising in economy mode. It can cruise at altitudes up to 45,000 feet. And it's got a mixture of avionics in the cockpit. The primary avionics are the FC530 by Butler. It might have originally been Collins, but anyway, it's listed as Butler now. And its avionics were fairly advanced for the time, offering some mixture of electronic flight instruments or semi-electronic flight instruments and more traditional steam gauges. It is not a glass cockpit. And this version, though, that been created by Flysimware, comes with three variants to the avionics for the navigation component. So you can either have the Garmin GNS 530 standard in the sim, 530 430 combination, 530 for nav and com 1 and 430 for nav and com 2, plus a transponder. And the other variants are a variant with the PMS GTN750, and the third and final variant is with the TDS GTN750NXi, which is the next generation of the 750 model. These are two separate products. The PMS 750 is available as a freeware download, but also with a payware upgrade, and the TDS 750 NX is available only as a payware product add-on. So you've got two freeware options and two payware options for the navigation avionics in the aircraft. Flysimware, this isn't they originally developed the Learjet 35 Alpha for P3D, and they brought a lot of their experience across into the Microsoft 2020 version that they've created, and they have had a lot of input from real-world pilots with a lot of airtime experience in this aircraft, and that shows in the flight modeling and the attention to detail in the aircraft systems. And until this was released, there weren't many very high quality business jets available in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. The stock Citation Longitude is very good, but that was only available for premium people who bought the premium version of the Flight Simulator. And the CJ4, Citation CJ4, is an extremely popular and very well modeled business jet as well. And I think a lot of people flying business jets were really enjoying flying the CJ4, but that has a very high level of automation in it, configured for single pilot use with a glass cockpit, a largely glass cockpit, with the Rockwell Collins Proline 21 avionics in it, whereas this just gives quite a different feel with its 1970s tech. So in this tutorial we're going to be covering the setup of the aircraft, and that's going to be looking more about how to select those different avionic options that I've mentioned, looking at the sensitivity settings, what might work for you and the kind of sensitivity considerations for your controllers, and then also getting into some of what are the essential keybinds. Because of the nature of the avionics, you're going to have to set up some particular functions and keybinds to get the best out of flying this aircraft. There will be subsequent videos, tutorial videos to follow. We'll be looking at the cockpit layout so you know where everything is. There'll be a tutorial on the core aircraft systems, such as the electrics and the hydraulics and fuel and all that good stuff. And then a series of tutorials will follow on then with going through each of the key checklists and phases of flight, with discussion of how to perform the checklist items, and discussion on a piloting technique for each of those phases. In particular, I'll be looking at how to use the FC530 auto flight control system, which will definitely take some getting used to. If you're used to flying something like the Garmin G3000 or G5000 avionics, this is a little bit different. And of course, it's obviously for simulation purposes only. And the other thing I would say with this tutorial, like all these tutorials, please watch them in order, because when I make the subsequent parts, the stuff that I cover in part 1, I'm going to assume that you know and you'll have listened and followed on from that information there. So that's enough for the introduction. Let's get into having a look at how to set the aircraft up before flight. So the first thing we're going to look at is the sensitivity settings. Now, exactly what sensitivity settings you should use are going to depend on the controllers that you have, and what's good for one controller may not necessarily be good for another. But the way that this aircraft's been modeled, I think it doesn't require anything special. It should be fairly normal and similar to other aircraft of a similar sort of weight and size. So we're going to go to options and control options. So here are the three main flight control systems. I've got my Alpha flight control yoke, my Bravo throttle quadrant, and my Velocity 1 rudder pedals. Obviously, again, this is going to depend on what controller devices you've got. And I've created an individual control profile for the Lear 35A for each. And if you don't know how to do that, you can do that by going to the preset manager, and that'll give you the choice to create a new profile or duplicate an existing one, edit, rename, or do whatever you want. Okay, so we'll just go back. Let's start off with the alpha, the flight controls and sensitivity. And this is where we're going to set the curves. Now, what I've found so far with the Learjet, it is not quite as responsive as the CJ4. So I have the reactivity settings set to 95%. But otherwise, I've got some fairly normal curves here. What I would say though is I'm going to adjust the curves for the ailerons, roll axis to 0%, so it's a straight curve. And why? Because I have got a honeycomb alpha, which is a full 180 degrees of rotation, so there's no need to have a curve. I should get a 1-for-1 response there, and that should help my piloting. For the elevator axis, though, I do have that 45 degree curve in there. You can play around with it and find what is going to work best for you, and I'm just going to bring that I'm going to bring that to 30 because I found it a little bit at times not responding quite as quickly as I want to my elevator inputs. And you know, this is a responsive aircraft. It was modeled on a fighter jet design originally, and it's very agile, so it shouldn't feel sluggish in the air. And I guess that's the main message I'm saying to you now, is that if you're flying the aircraft and you don't feel it's responding quickly enough, then perhaps alter your sensitivity settings. I don't know what devices and settings that they built the flight model for this aircraft on, but I don't think it was anything. I don't think they were all using, you know, really strange esoteric devices. I think they were using fairly standard devices, so all fairly normal. Okay, that's the sensitivity settings, but now what about some of the key bindings that you're going to have to use? And the guys at Flysimware have done a good job of making sure that everything essential you can bind within the native control options here. And it's not essential to use or necessary to use a third-party driver software, although if you do have access to one and you're on a PC, it'll give you more options. But let's talk about what some of the things here. You can see I've got smoke on and smoke off, and if I scroll down a little bit, you'll see that we've got other things like G limiters and stuff like that. Now, if we have a quick look at the yoke in the cockpit, you can see that it's arranged with a number of buttons. Now, I'll just describe them in turn. On the left hand of the yoke here, we have what is a barrel switch with a button in the middle. And that's a four-way barrel switch. It's like a hat switch, except it's got a button in the middle. And in the real aircraft, that is a dual function. And what do I mean by dual function? Well, when the button isn't pressed, it will do one thing, and when the button is pressed, it will do another. And let me explain that. So when the button isn't pressed and the autopilot is engaged, if you move that barrel switch up and down, it will command, if the autopilot is just in a basic pitch hold mode, or indeed even if it's just the flight director that's engaged and, you know, the pitch hold mode is armed but not actually active on the autopilot, what that will do is change the pitch of the flight director. And you can use that to sort of manually fly the aircraft if the autopilot is engaged, as I say, just in a basic mode. So it won't work if you have VS or speed modes engaged on the autopilot. But if it's just in pitch hold mode, you can push that button up and down and the aircraft will pitch up and or down to follow the flight director. If you push the button in the middle, that will disengage the autopilot. It will turn it off. It will not disengage the yaw damper. And then with the button pressed, you can well, after you press that button, what happens is that barrel switch reverts to a pitch and aileron trim controller. So just like any pitch trim on a yoke, so you push it up to trim down and push it down to trim up, and left for left aileron and right for right aileron, and it just combines all the functions of into one control device. So moving on to the next button on the yoke, that is the big red one here. That is the control wheel master switch, and that basically, if you press that, it will disengage the autopilot and the yaw damper. It will also stop the stall warning pusher and disengage the nose wheel steer lock. So you actually then press and hold it when you're on the ground, and it will allow you to engage nose wheel steering. So that's quite an important one. That's effectively what you use to disengage the autopilot. Moving across to the right hand handle, the top button is the maneuver roll pitch switch, and that is, you might be familiar with this and know under the name control wheel steering, CWS. It's the same idea. When you press and hold that, it will disengage the the autopilot servos, so they'll disengaged and allow you to manually maneuver the aircraft both in pitch and roll axis. But when you release the button, it will resume, the autopilot will come back on, and it will resume the vertical mode that was engaged before you press the button, and I believe it will also engage the lateral mode as well, but we'll check that when we get to that tutorial. The button beneath that is the pitch sync switch, and with the autopilot not in any one of the advanced vertical modes, so that's speed or VS modes, if it's just in pitch mode, or if the autopilot is not engaged but the flight directors are on, when you press and hold that, that will sync the flight director bars to whatever pitch you are currently holding. But if you do have one of those modes engaged, it will try to sync, but as soon as you release the button, it will go back to whatever the autopilot's telling it to do. It is a useful function feature, but it's not quite as important as the other three that we've just covered. Okay, so that's a lot of buttons. How do you now map them in the sim? Well, this is where we can come back and look at these bindings here. Now, you can see I've got my image of the alpha yoke on the right here. That helps guide us through. So let's start with how we've dealt with the barrel switch. Now, because I don't have a little button to press in the middle of my hatch switch, what I have done is I have separated out the functions of the barrel switch. And remember, it's got two functions. It serves as a way of giving commands to the autopilot, but it also serves as the pitch and aileron trim controller. So what I've actually got is I've got my pitch trim, my all-important pitch trim on buttons 6 and 5. That's the left-hand part of that split rocker switch. I don't use the right-hand part. I use that for other functions to do with my head tracking camera. So 6 and 5 for the pitch trim part of that, and then for the sending directions to, telling the flight director to pitch up and down, that is, you'll see it here. So we've got the joystick point of view up and joystick point of view down. And so again, that will give that function of if you don't have the autopilot, as long as the flight director's on and the autopilot isn't in VS or FLC modes, that will allow you to change the pitch indication of the flight director. And that's so we're using increase autopilot pitch hold reference or decrease, and you can set that how you like. I like to have it so if I push it up, the flight director goes up, and if I push it down, the flight director goes down. I find it a bit more intuitive that way. It's a kind of opposite of the way the pitch trim works, but that's just what I'm used to. Now, what about for the control wheel master switch? I've got that mapped to button 2 here, and you can see that that is what they've done is they've linked that with the G limiter command. So G limiter on and G limiter off, and that is that all important. Press it, it'll turn the autopilot off. If you're on the ground and you press and hold it, it will unlock the nose wheel steering and allow you to get better steering with the rudder pedals. Moving over then to the right hand side. Oh, before I do that, well, yes, I mentioned that the barrel switch in the real aircraft would be used to control aileron trim. Well, I have aileron trim and rudder trim mapped to the split rocker switch over here on the right hand side of the Bravo, and the top one I've got for aileron trim and the bottom one is for rudder trim. And in reality, don't use a lot of aileron trim, use it sometimes, but rudder trim tend to use it a bit more, but it's not used so much, so kind of quite happy to have them over there. Button 4 I use for the maneuver roll pitch switch. That's that one, if you press and hold it, it will allow you to hand fly the aircraft, but without turning the autopilot off completely. So what's that mapped? What do we use to control that? That is smoke. So you're going to use the smoke on and smoke off command to control that. And it's worth saying, because these are momentary switches, I'm just going to go in. So smoke on, as you can see, is on press. Validate that. And smoke off, you can see I've got bound to an on release. Now that you need to set it up that way. A word of caution: in Microsoft Flight Simulator there's a bug, and every time when you first set it up as on release and you validate it, you think it's fine, but it will actually change that back to an on press command. So you need to go in again and select on release and validate it again, and then it will work. It's also worth saying that some controllers, it's actually worth doubling the input here as well, so having the command mirrored in both columns, and that helps resolve problems that some users have had with some controllers. You can see again with the G limiter, that is also a momentary switch. You want to be able to press and hold it, and it will work while you're holding it, but then when you release it, you want it to revert. So that again is on a release. Set it up in exactly the same way. The barrel switch, they're just on press. That's for the autopilot pitch hold reference. They just can be on press, because you just press and hold them and it will keep on sending the command that you want. And finally, what about the pitch sync switch? I've got that mapped to button 3 here, and that is actually, it doesn't need anything for, they've just used a standard control for that, and that is the flight director pitch sync command, which I've mapped to button 3 on press. What about the throttles? Now I've got my throttle axis set up on external driver SPADN X, but there's absolutely nothing, just a standard throttle 1 and 2 for the normal throttle control of engines 1 and 2. You can set that up on your device, or if you've only got one throttle axis, then you can combine those. But one thing that you might need to think about is the reverse thrust function that the aircraft has. It does have reverse thrust, unlike the CJ4. And this is what I have found has worked for me. The two commands that I use are to initiate the throttle reverse thrust. I'm using the command hold throttle reverse thrust. I found that the one that's normally used, toggle reverse thrust, wasn't working well. So joystick button and 10 and 11 on the Honeycomb Bravo are the buttons that are associated with the reverse thrust levers on the commercial levers that you can actually see pictured here. Those are those two. Well, it's got all 4 thrust levers showing, but they are two. It's for the 3rd and 4th axis is button 10 and button 11, and you flick those little levers up and it will basically press button 10 and button 11, so hold throttle reverse thrust, and if I do that, it will engage the reverse thrust, and if I then push the joystick forward, or the axis, throttle axis forward, it will deliver more reverse thrust. And then when I return once I'm finished the reverse thrust operation, you bring the throttles back to idle and flick the switches down, and that will cut it'll take it out of reverse thrust, and that is using the throttle cut command, and again on the same buttons, except this time it's again an on release command, and I find that works well for me. Just turning to the rudder pedals is nothing fancy or special required at all. The sensitivity settings that I've got, very straightforward, as you can see, and in fact I'll just pop the reactivity up to 95%, so it matches the reactivity of the others. I've just got small extremity dead zones set up on these are the brake pedal axes, just to make sure I don't accidentally tap the brakes just when I'm moving my feet around on the pedals when I'm steering, but otherwise very straightforward, as you can see. So make sure you apply and save all the changes that you've made. Do make sure that you spend some time doing some test flying and getting the sensitivity setting just right for your device, and that'll overall give you a much better flight experience. Mentioned in the opening part of this video that there were different avionics options, 3 basic different avionics options, well 4 if we take into account the fact that you can have PMS as freeware or payware. So how do you do that? Well, unlike some other aircraft, it's no hot swapping in the cockpit, which I've always found a bit bizarre. Why would you want to change avionics mid-flight? Doesn't seem practical to me, but they've come up with a very nice solution, I think, here. And it's basically through the livery selection. So if we go to liveries, here are all the liveries, and you'll see I've got selected, it's the GTN750 variant there. But if I scroll up to the top, there's lots of liveries come with the aircraft. The first row will be for aircraft that have got the GTN750. That's the standard, what comes with the base simulator. It's since it was upgraded by working title, it is a very capable rendition, a very faithful rendition of the GTN750. It is more than capable navigational avionics. With this version, there's a separate transponder. Transponder isn't built into it, but that's a very simple piece of equipment to use. But if you want to fly with the PMS GTN750, you would select one of these liveries, and then scrolling down, we will see then we have so you'd select the appropriate livery, and that's all there is to it, apart from making sure that you have the appropriate, if it's not the GNA, if you're going for one of the 750s, you're going to need to have that installed in your community folder. Otherwise, you'll just have a blank screen when you load in. So those are all the essentials for getting your Learjet 35A set up before you go flying. Don't worry if some of that doesn't make sense yet. We'll be getting into a lot more of the cockpit layout and the controls in the following videos in this tutorial series. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked it, do hit like and subscribe. Comments are always welcome. And until the next time, happy simming.